Do you ever wonder what secrets truly lie beneath the floorboards of your own mind, festering in the dark until they demand release? What if the echoes of a forgotten transgression, a singular act of self-serving cruelty, could manifest not as guilt, but as a chilling, omnipresent entity that gnaws at the very fabric of your sanity? Imagine the subtle chill that creeps into the silence, the peripheral movement in an empty room, the whisper that isn't quite a whisper, but an idea planted deep within your skull. This is the truth of consequence, a haunting born not of spectral visitations, but of the soul's own unforgivable debt. Elias Thorne, a man whose prosperity had been meticulously built upon layers of carefully constructed indifference and an almost surgical detachment, dwelled in a sprawling, anachronistic mansion perched precariously on a blustery New England cliff. Its weathered stone facade and skeletal, gnarled trees seemed to cling to the precipice with a desperate, ancient grip, much like the secrets Elias himself harbored. The sea, a relentless, churning expanse of gray and white, perpetually crashed against the rocks below, its mournful roar a constant, unsettling backdrop to the solitude. Elias, a man of sharp angles and perpetually furrowed brow, had inherited not only the Thorne estate, but also its weighty, unspoken legacy. A vast, almost industrial fortune forged in shadows. He was a creature of habit and meticulous order, his days a sterile dance between ledgers and the sterile quiet of his study, save for the rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock that seemed to mark not time, but an inevitable countdown. Yet, beneath this veneer of control, a fragile anxiety hummed, a low-frequency tremor born from a single, devastating act years prior. The calculated ruin of a rival, a man named Silas Croft, whose small, burgeoning shipping enterprise had stood in the way of Thorne's expansion. Elias had orchestrated a series of devastating, anonymous financial attacks, tapping against his study window, even when no branches brushed against the glass. The unmistakable, drawn-out sigh that seemed to emanate from the empty parlor. A sound so laden with sorrow it would prickle the hairs on his neck. He began to sleep less, the silence of the mansion becoming a heavy, suffocating blanket that amplified every imagined sound. His mind, once a fortress of logical deduction, started to unravel at the edges. He found himself walking through the house, searching for the source of these disquieting noises, his hand gripping the banister, his breath catching in his throat with each turn of a darkened corridor. One evening, as a particularly violent storm raged outside, rattling the very foundations of the house, Elias heard it distinctly. The strained metallic groan of a ship's rigging, a sound he hadn't heard since his youth spent observing his father's maritime operations. A sound that brought an unbidden image of Silas Croft's modest vessel, the Seafoam, sinking beneath the waves. He rushed to the window, peering out into the torrential rain and the impenetrable darkness, but saw nothing but the churning, frothing maw of the ocean. He tried to rationalize it, blaming the wind, the old house, his own frayed nerves. Yet the memory of Croft's gaunt, despairing face on their last encounter, a face etched with betrayal and utter defeat, clung to him like a shroud. The scent of salt and damp wood, phantom yet potent, began to pervade the air, particularly in the study where he spent most of his waking hours. He found himself constantly checking the windows, the locks, the ancient, creaking floorboards beneath his feet. He became convinced someone was in the house, a vagrant, a curious local. But his exhaustive searches always yielded nothing. The sense of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on his skin even when alone. Shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce into fleeting, human-like forms in the periphery of his vision, only to dissipate when he turned his gaze directly upon them. The grand ornate mirrors throughout the house, once merely decorative, became menacing, reflecting not just of his once impenetrable mind. He began to question his own sanity, to wonder if the isolation, the crushing weight of his unspoken secret, was finally breaking him. He would wake in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, convinced he had heard his name called, a desperate, raspy plea, right beside his ear. One night, he awoke to the distinct sensation of being held down, a heavy weight pressing against his chest, stealing his breath. His eyes darted wildly in the moonlit darkness, but he saw nothing, felt nothing but the crushing pressure. He struggled, a guttural cry escaping his lips, until suddenly the weight lifted, leaving him gasping for air, trembling uncontrollably. He knew then that this was more than imagination, more than the creaks of an old house. Something was actively tormenting him, and its presence was growing stronger, more palpable. He saw glimpses of a figure in the gloom, tall and gaunt, a silhouette against the perpetual gray of the sea-facing windows, its form wavering like heat haze, always just out of focus, always just beyond reach. The scent of decay, subtle yet sickening, began to mingle with the sea salt, a sharp, metallic tang that seemed to catch in his throat. Elias, a man who had always prided himself on his unwavering logic, found himself staring into the abyss of the irrational, his mind a battlefield where the echoes of his past were waging war against his present. He began to see patterns in the seemingly random events. The books that fell open always contained passages about justice or retribution. The whisper seemed to form partial, condemning phrases, and the apparition, whenever it appeared, seemed to point towards the sea, towards the treacherous waters that had swallowed Croft's livelihood. The climax arrived on a night of unparalleled ferocity, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing against the mansion's windows with an almost personal vendetta. Elias, his nerves shredded, his eyes wide and bloodshot from days of sleepless torment, sat huddled in his study, a half-empty bottle of "And now you will pay the tithes due." Elias tried to speak, to deny, to rationalize, but his throat was constricted by an invisible hand. The apparition glided towards him, its translucent form emanating an icy chill that cut to his marrow. It pointed a spectral, dripping finger towards a large, ornate chest in the corner of the room. A chest where Elias had always kept his most damning ledgers and documents, including the meticulously planned destruction of Croft's business. As the spectral finger touched the chest, its ancient locks sprang open with a deafening click. Inside, instead of ledgers, was a single rusted ship's bell, covered in barnacles and emitting a faint, mournful clang. The bell, small and insignificant, was a replica of the one that had adorned Silas Croft's beloved Seafoam. The ghost of Silas Croft moved closer, its eyes burning holes through Elias. "The weight of your sin, Thorne. It anchors you to me." The spectral hand reached out, not to touch, but to envelop Elias in an agonizing mental grip. A torrent of memories, long suppressed and buried, flooded Elias's mind. Croft's pleading calls, his desperate attempts to save his business, the cold, calculating satisfaction Elias had felt as he watched his rival crumble. He relived every cruel decision, every anonymous sabotage, every whispered lie. The guilt, once a distant hum, now roared through him, a deafening crescendo that shattered the carefully constructed walls of his denial. The room began to spin, the walls seeming to breathe, the very air turning to acid in his lungs. Croft's spectral face, once filled with despair, twisted into a triumphant, chilling grin. "The sea claims all debts, Thorne." Elias screamed, a raw, animalistic sound torn from the deepest recesses of his being. He lunged away from the apparition, towards the window overlooking the churning abyss. The ghost of Croft, its work done, faded back into the mist, leaving behind only the unbearable weight of Elias's awakened conscience. He clawed at the window latch, his mind a maelstrom of terror and self-loathing. The wind howled an invitation, and the crashing waves below beckoned like a hungry maw. With a final, choked sob, a primal surrender to the suffocating guilt that had consumed him, Elias Thorne threw open the window and plunged into the raging tempest below, his tormented scream swallowed by the furious roar of the ocean. The mansion stands silent now, a weathered sentinel against the relentless sea, its secrets once again sealed within its ancient walls. The name Thorne, once synonymous with power and influence, slowly faded into the chilling whispers of local legend, a cautionary tale of ambition and the devastating price of hidden transgressions. They say that on the darkest, stormiest nights, when the sea roars its loudest and the wind screams through the skeletal trees, a faint, mournful clang can still be heard emanating from the cliffside. A sound that echoes the tragic fate of a man undone by the very secrets he sought to bury. It is a stark reminder that some debts cannot be paid in coin, and some specters will haunt not only houses, but the very soul, demanding an ultimate, irreversible reckoning. What shadows do you carry that may one day demand their due? What dark secrets lurk beneath your own floorboards, waiting for the perfect storm to emerge and claim their rightful vengeance? Think carefully, for the whispers are always listening.